Tonight on Ukraine Today. Massive fire in Crimea. Ukrainian drones hit an oil depot in the temporarily occupied Feodosia. Explosions were also heard near Simferopol. Tomahawks for Ukraine. Why does the US President Donald Trump want to discuss this with dictator Putin? Tension on the border. Armed men in military uniform without insignia were spotted on the Russian side near Estonia. That's exactly how the occupation of Crimea started back in 2014. De-escalation in the Middle East? Donald Trump addressed the Knesset, Israel's parliament, and announced the end of the war in Gaza. All that and more, right now. Hello, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and let's get to the news. Ukrainian drones struck an oil depot in the temporarily occupied Feodosia. Again, a massive fire broke out at the site. Explosions were also reported near the occupied city of Simferopol. Ukrainian defense forces are advancing in the Zaporizhia region, that's according to the General Staff of Ukraine. There are reports of Russian invaders being destroyed and captured. More on the frontline situation in our story.
Russia has intensified assaults on almost all fronts. Mechanized columns have been deployed again, and once more, the enemy's equipment was destroyed. How partisan intelligence helped repel a massive offensive near Vovchansk, mountains of destroyed enemy equipment near Dobropilya, and the critical situation with Russian mobilization. Find out what life is like on the front today. Watch right now. The Russian army is attacking along the entire front line, but is making almost no progress anywhere. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. The next Russian General Staff advance was planned, in particular, in the Kharkiv region. Near Vovchansk, the enemy had amassed enough forces for a breakthrough, but lost even before the offensive began. The Atesh partisans report that their agents from the 82nd Motorized Rifle Regiment were able to transmit the exact coordinates of Russian artillery positions, armored vehicles, and locations where the occupiers were stationed. As a result, Ukraine's defense forces were able to prepare in advance for possible offensive actions and strike back at the enemy. As a result of the effective work of the Ukrainian military, the Russians' plan collapsed before it even began.
Taking advantage of the weather conditions, well, the not so comfortable weather, and for example, the lack of intensity in our drone operations, because the drones simply either won't be able to see or won't be able to take off. The enemy will try to carry out more active assault operations. In fact, this includes the use of mechanized components, which we are already observing today in certain areas of the front.
At the same time, the situation remains tense in the area around the city of Kupiansk. There, too, our military is observing enemy buildups, as the enemy repeatedly tries to increase its presence in the settlement. However, despite constant attempts to launch new assaults, Russia has made no advances in this direction.
Unfortunately, the enemy has managed to enter the outskirts of the city. You know that fighting continues there in the northwestern and northern parts of the city. The enemy is also trying to infiltrate the central part of Kupiansk with sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The situation is very difficult. The goal is clear: to break out into open terrain and try to advance further through Kharkiv region. The attempt to seize the city, the attempt to take control of Kupiansk as a key hub, is also about logistics. In other words, it's an attempt to cut off our logistics and create unfavorable conditions for those troop groupings that are located, in particular, at this section of the front and in neighboring areas.
The Dobropilya direction is probably the hottest spot on the front today. In the past 24 hours, intense fighting has broken out there for the settlement of Vladimirovka. It is from there that the Russians are trying to break through to their own forces who remain here encircled.
The landing of paratroopers has become an additional problem, Deep State adds. The Russians brought between 50 and 75 infantrymen into the village. The situation remains difficult. The Russian armed forces will try to take maximum advantage of the worsening weather conditions, analysts warn. Later, the Azov National Guard's First Corps reported that they had nevertheless held on to Vladimirovka.
According to the Corps statement, during the offensive, the Russians deployed 35 units of heavy armored vehicles, including tanks and armored fighting vehicles. As a result of defensive actions, 1 armored recovery vehicle, 3 tanks, and 16 enemy armored fighting vehicles were destroyed or damaged. The Russians also lost 41 motorcycles and 2 light vehicles. Near neighboring Pokrovsk, Russia also decided to amass forces. A group of infantry on motorcycles was sent to break through. The result, minus 13 motorcyclists and no advance. Another epic video from Donetsk region, Ukrainian drones versus Russian tanks. The Ukrainian armed forces showed how our soldiers destroyed half a dozen enemy tanks and a Grad multiple rocket launcher system. The video was published by the UAV forces of the Ukrainian armed forces. Thus, in the Donetsk direction, operators of the 427th Separate UAV Regiment Rarog stopped the enemy's assault actions by knocking out 5 tanks at once, thereby depriving the infantry groups of cover and making further advance impossible, according to the report. In addition, the military delivered an effective strike against a BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher system while the enemy was firing at the positions of the Ukrainian army. According to the command, the defense forces have now managed to gain a tactical advantage in this sector. At the same time, our troops are operating not only along the front line, but also in the rear of the Russian grouping. Thus, in occupied Donetsk, a large-scale fire broke out after drone strikes.
Vitaly, that's...
According to local clubs, the black smoke could be seen from any part of the city. It is known that the site of the strike was the former Ocean hypermarket near the bypass road connecting Sloviansk, Donetsk and Mariupol. However, residents reported online that after the strikes, they clearly heard further detonations, and the night before, they had seen a concentration of military vehicles near the store. It is known that as a result of the fire, the building's roof collapsed and the premises were completely burned out.
It's still flaring up, apparently.
Meanwhile, in Russia, against the backdrop of failures at the front, the pace of mobilization has sharply declined. Recruitment into the ranks of the occupiers has dropped almost threefold, which is already being felt by units at the front, said Ivan Timochka, head of the Council of Reservists of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to him, Russia is trying to solve this problem in several ways. In particular, they have passed a bill in the first reading that allows for mobilization for compulsory service throughout the year. Timochka says that Russia may use conscripts, including in the war against Ukraine.
In the last 2 quarters, they have been recruiting 30 or 35,000 per quarter, not per month. Whereas before they used to recruit that number in a month, and now it takes them 3 months. So now, per month, they are recruiting about 10 to 12,000.
At the same time, military analysts note that in the Russian information space, they no longer even try to hide the prospects facing the newly mobilized, openly stating that, on average, after signing a contract, they can expect to live less than 2 weeks.
The mayor of the city of Strezhevoy in the Tomsk region has reached a new level of candor and honestly said that new contract soldiers are needed to replace those who have been killed and wounded. According to the head of the city, on Friday he recruits new people and on Monday he buries the old ones. War correspondent Romanov gave a more detailed explanation of why people are constantly needed at the front. The life expectancy of an assault soldier is 12 days, from signing the contract, training at the range, to the actual assault. In the singular, usually there is only one assault.
And this statistic is relentlessly confirmed by the Ukrainian armed forces. According to the General Staff, in the past 24 hours alone, the occupiers have lost more than 1,200 of their soldiers. In total, Russian losses have exceeded 1,122,000 people.
Over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,140 troops killed and wounded. That brings the total number of invaders eliminated since the start of the full-scale invasion to 1,123,950. In addition, Ukrainian forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 21 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment in just one day. At least 50,000 Russian soldiers have deserted since the invasion began. That's according to leaked documents from Russia's so-called Ministry of Defense. I'd say the real numbers are likely much higher, because Russian troops commit war crimes not only against peaceful Ukrainians, but also against their own citizens, even those who gladly spread Russian aggression. Here are the details.
I know about many violations, about how people were zeroed out. I know of cases, I know where bodies are buried. That's how it is. And specifically, an order came down about me, to zero me out, so that I wouldn't make it out of the combat position.
This convict occupier deserted his post after an order was given not to let him leave the position alive. He left together with another soldier who had received a similar order. That was the only way to stay alive.
I was beaten precisely when I first went to Sochi. They caught me and they beat me very brutally with a bucket and a stick. They threw me into a pit, and from the pit I was sent on a combat mission in handcuffs.
What has happened to this occupier now is unknown, but the video was posted in Z channels as a farewell message before death.
The guys really ran away because it's extremely hard to get out of there alive at all.
And here is the wife of the occupier, Ivan, a Russian soldier who was initially called a Sochi man. He refused to go on the mission after spending 2 days evacuating a fellow soldier from the front line. After that, he was ordered to go out with other soldiers to monitor the troops so they wouldn't flee their positions. Ivan himself complained that many refused to follow orders and desert.
The guys just can't go any further. Today, for example, I sent out a group of 4-6 people, but only 3 came back. And now they're just sitting there crying. They're saying, we're scared, we won't go, we don't want to die, and so on. They can't make it through this open area. I'm just sitting here myself, I say, I just don't want to push anyone.
In the end, Ivan was eliminated. As for the Sokniks, their numbers in the Russian army are only growing since they are treated like cannon fodder. And many choose to live in freedom, even if it means being on the run.
So, I'm a saboteur by specialty. That's my specialty. There are only 6 of us left. There used to be 70. Now there are 6. There's a road of life here. From Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar. It's so hard to get through it. You drive over corpses, there's no road. The van goes like this. You realize who you're driving over.
Even Russian soldiers themselves say that the reason for such huge losses is, in particular, lack of preparation.
They recruit people who aren't worth a damn. Millions are spent on their training. They arrive and they're immediately sent to the slaughter.
There's another option, to surrender, but the Russian command has made considerable efforts to intimidate their subordinates. For example, they vividly describe supposed torture in Ukrainian captivity.
They say they fill your mouth with foam, cut off your balls. I was also afraid to go because of that. Cutting off balls is rare, of course, but the foam thing is constant. When I crossed over, I said, guys, you're not going to foam me or anything, right? They said, what are you talking about? What foam? They told me. That's just what they say where you're from. Relax, everything will be fine. They fed me, we left, they treated me well.
That's why, from their point of view, the only option occupiers choose is to desert their posts. According to leaked documents from the Russian Ministry of Defense, since the start of the so-called special military operation, about 50,000 people have deserted the Russian army. And that's just the official number. In reality, things are much worse. But even if you just look at the documents, you can see a worsening trend. In recent months, the number of desertion cases has increased. For example, in Grozny, there are now 17% more cases than a year ago. And it's highly doubtful that the situation for Putin's army will improve.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Last night, Ukrainian air defense forces intercepted 69 out of 82 enemy drones over the north, east and south of the country. Unfortunately, 13 drones hit 7 locations. In the Odessa region, a large fire broke out at textile and sewing warehouses. 1 person was injured. Russian attacks also damaged power infrastructure. Because of that, emergency power shutdowns were introduced in Kharkiv, Sumy, Poltava, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kirovograd and Chernihiv regions. If this war is not gonna get settled, I may send them Tomahawks. That's what US President Donald Trump said about supplying those missiles to Ukraine. He added that he might need to talk to Putin about it. Sounds strange, maybe, but from his words, it's clear he's talking about an ultimatum.
They need Patriots very badly. They'd like to have Tomahawks. That's a step up. They'd like to have Tomahawks. We talked about that. And so we'll see. Well, I don't know. I might have to speak to Russia, to be honest with you, about Tomahawks. Do they want to have Tomahawks going in their direction? I don't think so. I think I might speak to Russia about that, in all fairness. I told that to President Zelensky because Tomahawks are a new step of aggression. Right? You understand very well.
Are you saying that you will speak to Putin first about Tomahawks?
I might talk to him. I might say, look, if this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send him Tomahawks. I may say that. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, very offensive weapon. And honestly, Russia does not need that. They don't need that. Yeah, I might tell them that if the war is not settled, that we may very well do it. We may not, but we may do it. I think it's appropriate to bring up. Yeah, I want to see the war settled.
What's interesting is that this statement has already been heard from the American president, and the Kremlin definitely got the message. Logically, in terms of healthy diplomacy, Trump should voice it directly to Putin, but healthy diplomacy works with sane states, and here we are talking about Russia. So to me, the ultimatum is already there. What's missing are the deadlines and the confidence that Trump won't change his mind. We'll be watching closely. Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And please share it. Share the video so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Policy and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, has arrived in Kyiv. On her social media, she wrote, "Ukrainians inspire the world with their courage. Their resilience call for our full support. I'm in Kyiv today for talks on financial and military support, the security of Ukraine's energy sector, and holding Russia accountable for its war crimes." Near the Estonian border, armed men in unmarked uniforms, the so-called Little Green Men, were spotted on the Russian side. That's exactly how Russia's occupation of Crimea began back in 2014. Is there a threat for Estonia and the entire Baltic region? That's next.
Putin's little green men are already at Estonia's doorstep. It looks like the bunker dweller is preparing a Crimea 2.0 operation in Europe. Western media are publishing footage in which you can see armed men on the road. Judging by their uniforms, it's clear these are definitely not Russian border guards. Due to this sudden activation of unidentified Russian troops in the areas of checkpoints between Russia and Estonia, the police department has urgently closed the country's eastern borders.
We decided to close the road to prevent possible provocations and incidents. Our main goal is the safety of the Estonian population. Cunter-Pedovsk, operations chief of the southern prefecture.
The safety of our own population is the top priority for all Baltic countries. For example, today Latvia is expelling at least 841 Russian citizens from the country. These are Russians who were unable to prove even a basic knowledge of the Latvian language. The EU country no longer wants to see the Kremlin's fifth column on its territory.
The stay of such Russians in Latvia will be considered illegal, and their access to social services will be closed. If the Russians remain, they will face deportation. Madara Puke, representative of the Latvian Office of Citizenship and Migration Affairs.
Due to the possible Russian attack on NATO, the alliance is preparing to evacuate 1,200,000 people. According to the authorities of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, this is the number of citizens who would need to flee from war in the event of aggression from the Kremlin. We are talking about at least a 40-kilometer wide strip along the borders with Russia and Belarus. For Lithuania, this would mean a total evacuation. In that case, even the capital would fall into the potential frontline zone. However, in Vilnius, they are confident that such a scenario is unlikely.
An emergency of such scale, which would require evacuating Vilnius entirely, is unlikely to develop in just one day. That is, it may well be necessary to start with some localized evacuations of the eastern outskirts of the city or even individual neighborhoods. But we proceed from the assumption that ultimately our resources must be prepared for the evacuation of all 600,000 residents of Vilnius.
Meanwhile, in Estonia, which has closed its borders, local churches, schools, universities and sports arenas are already actively preparing to receive internally displaced persons. Special transportation, trains and buses are being allocated for this purpose. Residents are being assigned to potential evacuation points and given maps and information about the evacuation routes. Europeans themselves are stocking up on provisions, first aid kits and packing emergency bags in case they need to flee suddenly.
People have been talking about this for a long time. For the past several weeks, even months. At work, everywhere. We'll see what happens. For now, we need to take care of the most urgent things.
In total, the population of the Baltic countries exceeds 6 million people. Of these, almost 2.9 million live in Lithuania, nearly 2 million in Latvia, and 1.4 million people in Estonia. In Vilnius, evacuation plans are being prepared for about a quarter of the population, in Latvia for a third, and in Estonia for 10%. And that's taking into account the most optimistic forecasts. According to military analysts, if Putin launches a full-scale offensive against the Baltic countries, every single resident there could become a displaced person.
They have platforms for various types of missile weaponry, which can strike in the shortest possible time. As one of our sources told us, these systems can literally be rolled out of garages, for example, at the Luga military base, 100 kilometers from the Estonian border, loaded with Iskander missiles in 5 minutes and launched in quantities that would cover the entire territory of Estonia and most of Latvia.
Meanwhile, Russian propaganda is foaming at the mouth, insisting that the Kremlin's intentions are purely peaceful and that the Baltic countries supposedly have nothing to fear. Even the bunker dweller himself, putting on an innocent face, tries to reassure the West.
We have never initiated military confrontation ourselves. It's pointless, unnecessary, just unnecessary and simply absurd. They can't possibly believe this. They can't possibly believe what they're saying, that Russia is planning to attack NATO, because it's impossible to believe such nonsense.
In much the same way, right before February 2022, Moscow was insisting they had no intention of invading Ukraine. Earlier in 2014, Putin also denied the involvement of Russian army soldiers in the annexation of Crimea. So it's no surprise that at the first sight of the little green men, the Baltic countries began preparing for the worst.
The nature of hybrid warfare is such that you might not realize, is this already a war, a single attack, or just an accident? The same goes for the damaged communication cables in the Baltic Sea or the plane that recently crashed in Lithuania. An attack or an accident, not to mention the constant problems with the GPS signal in the area of the Suwałki corridor.
And adding fuel to the fire at NATO's border is Putin's loyal friend, Alexander Lukashenko. The latter has resorted to yet another dirty provocation. He suddenly put the troops in Belarus on alert. The country's Ministry of Defense cheerfully reported that units are already moving to designated areas to carry out the tasks assigned by the Batka.
The armed forces units, which are involved in the comprehensive combat readiness check, are currently moving to their specifically assigned areas.
However, analysts insist that all of this is more for show than actual preparation for a real invasion. Belarus will continue to constantly escalate the situation and threaten with combat readiness checks. As for the Russian army, it is so bogged down in the war in Ukraine that the Kremlin simply doesn't have the strength to open a second front. Nevertheless, everything could change quickly.
Recruiting new soldiers takes quite a long time. But in principle, this is probably a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. Because there are enough combat-ready units at the front in Ukraine, so all that's needed is to simply transfer them. That won't take much time. And then arm them, reorganize them somehow.
Among experts, there is an opinion that Russia is already preparing for war with NATO and may strike earlier than intelligence agencies expect. For example, the American Institute for the Study of War claims that Moscow has entered the so-called Phase Zero in preparing for a confrontation with the alliance. Russia is creating reserves and developing new tactics for waging war without the mass use of armored vehicles and is capable of launching new aggression without waiting for its army to fully recover after the war with Ukraine. Whether Putin will back down or actually attack the Baltic countries, we will find out very soon.
And finally, to the Middle East. All 20 Israeli hostages still alive have been freed. Hamas militants handed them over to the Red Cross and they have now returned to Israel. However, the terrorists are still holding the bodies of 28 murdered hostages. By the time you watch this, the situation may have changed. The President of the United States has arrived in Israel on an official visit. Speaking at the Knesset, Donald Trump announced the end of the war in Gaza. To honor his visit, banners with words of gratitude were displayed in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities. And here in Ukraine, we are always ready to thank the American president for helping bring an end to the Russian war. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.